Hello, folks. My name is Jim Worthen. The show is Worthen One-on-One. You'll be able to see underneath our pictures as you want when this show plays. We do that because you may see 5 minutes of it and say, gee, I like this, but I got to go down to Vaughn's. And I do get money from Vaughn's for saying that. No, I don't. And you want to know when you can pick it up. Also, many of my guests, like today, are speaking to situations that go beyond the boundaries of Channel 17 on the south coast of Santa Barbara. So you can see where on the internet we are. There's 2 platforms, and they'll be there next week. In fact, both of them, they'll be active for the next 10 weeks on the show. They'll be archived probably forever. My granddaughter, I gotta quit telling this joke. My granddaughter once said to me, you know you're on the internet and you'll be there forever? And I said, yeah, what's wrong with that? And she said, well, it means 200 years from now, your great-great-granddaughter will be as embarrassed as I am. So she claims she didn't say that, but I know her heart. My guest today is, as I do this time of year, and I've been accused of this being a political show till around Easter and Christmas, when I'm accused it's a religious show because I have priests and ministers and other people on celebrating those holidays. I've been accused of it being trying to sell people's books and pictures because I have artists and writers on. So it's an eclectic show. I think that's the right word, eclectic. Anyway, it's multifaceted. We're in the political season. I met a young man that is unbelievable. I still haven't wrapped my ancient brain around where he's coming from. I've been arguing with him about his IQ because it's got to be off the charts, and mine is, so if he's smarter than I am. And I accused him of being 30, and then no. I said 26, no. And Elijah, you're 18?
I'm 18 years old, yes.
I don't know why you lied to make your age lower. you need to make it older to get into bars So you are very active in the philosophy and some groups that are called libertarian.
Yes.
We're going to get into explaining what that is, but you recently have registered Republican. And the reason for that is people learn. We had a girl run for Congress who wanted to be an independent, and we call her Miss 6% because, and she was a great candidate. But the labels mean something, the R and D. Mm-hmm. And the R automatically is worth 40%, and the D is worth almost 50%, and the rest are independent, truly. The reason the R runs ahead of its registration is so many independents, when they see the 2 labels, flip to identifying with Republicans. So what brought this craziness that you want to run for Senate?
Well, so I've been interested in politics from a very young age. I was raised by 2 parents. One is a Reagan Republican and one leans libertarian, and I don't use that term loosely. And so politics has always been a part of my life. And they always encouraged me to think about politics and philosophy and religion without really pushing me in any sort of direction. So I always had a sort of freedom and an interest in those areas. And so when I was about 12 or 13, I decided that the moment I was 18, I would try to run for some office. And so I was also always the type of person I was always that weirdo who's interested in watching like the live streams of the state assembly and the state senate and Congress. And so I figured, I'm 18, there's nothing stopping me. I might as well just throw my hat in the ring and try to get my ideas out there.
And you found that there were people that were acceptant and said, we'll support you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are looking for younger candidates. As you may know, there's a lot of people calling for term limits in Congress and that sort of thing. So people are excited by young voices, and so I've faced much more support than I have individuals not wanting to run.
Are you for term limits?
Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yes,
are?
absolutely.
Do you remember that Newt Gingrich got elected in 1994 with the Contract for America?
Mm-hmm.
There were 10 points. He got them all passed by Congress. One was term limits.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional because they believed, at least on the national level, term limits were dictated by the Constitution, and there were no term limits. You'd need to amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
Now that's different in the office you're running for. Is there a limit on it?
Yes, there are term limits. I believe for state senate it's 12 years. Yes.
And then there are assemblymen. I think some of the old guard, mainly Democrat, have figured out to be, I think it's 12 years for Senate and also 12 years for Assembly.
Yes.
So they can figure out a way to get 24 years.
Absolutely.
And they do.
Yeah.
We're going to talk mainly about state issues and where libertarianism goes. And libertarianism, I believe, and I'm sure you do, exceeds the government that we're facing at each time. It's a core philosophy. Tell us what it is.
So libertarianism boils down to the notion that each individual has a right to do what they will with their body and their property, as long as they aren't directly affecting others or their property, defrauding others, manipulating others. And so for libertarians, on every issue, we try to have solutions that aren't government-based. Whenever viable, whenever it's functional, we try to have the free markets, and I mean truly free markets. We're not for cronyism or corporatism. And communities, we want to foster strong, interdependent communities to take care of their members so that government is always minimized whenever possible. So that's the sort of outlook we have on policies. Because we believe in freedom for all individuals, we want to minimize the state and maximize free markets and strong communities.
So if it came to a choice between the level of government, it would be the smallest. If it came to a choice between government and non-government institutions, if it came to a choice between Google and the guy who's got a website in Santa Barbara, the guy who's got what? Tell me.
I see what you mean. Well, when it comes to big corporations like Google and others, a lot of them are propped up and defended and given extra protections from the government. And so when I talk about truly free markets, I believe that each business should be on a level playing field, and that each is not given any benefits from the government, and at the same time they're not impeded. That is to say, each business should be able to operate with minimum taxes and fees and regulations, the bare minimum, as long as they're not harming or defrauding their customers or employees. And so I believe that every business should be held to that standard, and I believe that the government should not be subsidizing, protecting, or giving any extra powers to any businesses to push them to monopoly status. And so I personally always favor the little guy. So even if given in a choice, even if there's a huge company that's come into existence purely through the free market, and a small one, I'm always personally going to choose and support the little guy. That's my issue. If that's the question you were getting at.
Yeah, I'm going to ask two more questions and then ask you to kind of give your pieces of your stump speech. It seems to me that what you're saying raises a question of government subsidies. Some forms of business and some businesses ask for and get government subsidies.
So I believe that overall, I disagree with that policy. I believe to a degree, one issue is I'm a free market environmentalist, and there's issues with agricultural subsidy and regulations that have led to a thing we like to call monocrop culture, where you have these corporations that are incentivized to only produce a single crop or a couple crops, and it has an issue. It brings up issues with biodiversity, and also these government subsidies help these larger corporations buy out and take over the smaller small scale agriculture. And so that's one example I like to bring up when talking about how subsidies can and do hurt small businesses and bring larger businesses to a closer to monopoly status, and also in turn can have issues, can affect the environment negatively.
On the nonprofits and government end, there's something called grants to do certain things, build a certain highway, build a certain school. How does a libertarian look at that?
Well, we like to, whenever possible, try to have public fixtures be provided by the private marketplace. But of course, that isn't always going to function. There are going to be times when, for the sake of functionality, the government is going to have to work with or subsidize a local business or a local nonprofit for a specific purpose. And I'm fine with that as it's necessary. If and when it's viable to just have the free market deal with issues, I'll advocate for that.
That subsidies, how about grants? We need government grants to build a stadium, to build more of a school. It's either the grant or the bond. Where does the libertarian stand on that?
I'd have a similar view when it comes to subsidies and working with local businesses. Basically, the goal would be the minimum necessary. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that we should be using taxpayer dollars to build a stadium or a sport facility.
Wait, you hit a term that I like to hear more.
Taxpayer dollars?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
all this money the government has came from my pocketbook.
Yeah, what it comes down to is it's your money, and it's entrusted to these politicians to deal with for purposes the public would like. And I believe the best way to have the public express their view with their money is to leave it in their pocket and let them vote with their dollar in the marketplace for issues like this.
So you would be against a school, for instance, going and asking for more grants rather than a specific bond issue?
Well, I believe that would be an issue on a case-by-case issue. If we're running out of schools because we're not providing enough funding and it's becoming a serious issue and it's just not functional to just, at least in that situation, just leave everything to the free market, so to speak, I'm okay with using taxpayer dollars for that situation. But again, with libertarianism, the idea is always the minimum necessary government, the minimum necessary use and stealing, as I like to say, of your tax dollars.
So, being we're at education, what is the libertarians', what shall we say, priorities in providing education on K through 12?
Yeah, so I personally believe that we need to, on the level of California and the United States, work slowly to a system where we have much more and much more affordable private schooling, much more accessible homeschooling, charter schooling. And so I believe a good step in that direction would be school choice legislation. And a lot of people bring up issues with school choice legislation, saying that, well, a lot of families who can afford to send their kids to private school will be receiving just extra tax benefits. But I believe there are qualifications we can make to this to have a system where individuals who otherwise cannot afford to send their kids to private school can have a tax return, in a sense, or the cost that would otherwise go to paying for their child in the public school refunded to them.
So we're not giving them money.
Yeah.
We're accessing them to the money being used for education
Exactly.
already. Okay. So where'd you go to school?
So I went to SBCC for a while, and then I transferred to an online university where I was studying political science.
Where'd you go to elementary school?
I went to elementary school over on Notre Dame School, over on, I believe, West Mitchell Terrena.
Pappas.
Yeah.
You're a Catholic. Much better now that they don't speak all Latin,
Yeah.
right? Yes. Although you would have learned Latin.
Yeah, I kind of would have loved to have Latin class. That'd be fun. But that's just me. So I went to Notre Dame school, and then for much of high school, I went to a local charter school called Olive Grove, which is a public charter school.
Yeah.
And then I went over to UCSB, and now I'm studying political science online.
You're still going to UCSB?
Oh no, not UCSB, SBCC.
Ah.
And I transferred to an online university where I'm studying political
Okay.
science, getting my BA.
What?
It's a Liberty University online.
Liberty. Oh, that's that ultra right-wing Falwell school, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful school.
Yeah,
I
it's-
love. I'm a NASCAR fan, and I love to see the Byron, who is the one of the best drivers, and on the back of it says "Liberty U." And they're one of his sponsors.
Yeah.
Everybody sponsor NASCAR. Are you a NASCAR fan?
Not really.
No. Football fan?
Used to be. I don't keep up on sports much these days.
Okay.
Politics is sort of my sport.
It is a great sport, but we have to be careful of spiking the ball because
Yeah.
it'll come back to haunt us. So in education, how would you handle the disparity? You've talked about the disparity to private schools and public schools. How about the disparity in funding and for homeschoolers?
Yeah, so some of the school choice legislation that I've looked at that I like would also give the same tax breaks or tax returns or whatever you want to call them, or returns of funding to basically anyone who doesn't have their child enrolled in public school. Or there could be qualifications made so that for individuals under a certain income, they can receive, and they don't have their child enrolled in a public school, they can receive that money. And so they can use that for homeschooling, they can use that for charter school, they can use that for a private school, just whatever they choose, it's their money.
So all the changes in education that you are for won't be to get new taxes, to give new subsidies. It will be the reallocation
The reallocation, for the most part.
of what's been
Yeah.
taken already.
Yeah, with the end goal of using this legislation to try to foster a free, competitive market in education, where it's not just the standard to send your kid to a public school. Now there's choice, and it's cost effective. It's more inexpensive and accessible for people to have alternative forms of education.
I would think in certain industries early on, libertarians were very active in unions. Today, the unions seem to be the backbone of the ultra-left in trying to destroy libertarians and conservatives of any kind. How do you feel about unions?
So traditional unions, traditional workers' unions, whether it be, this includes to a degree teachers' unions and things like that, I am a fan. I believe that unionizing is an aspect of the free market that keeps pay and prices in check. It is a positive force overall, and one of the few purely free market-based ways of maintaining a living wage and low prices. But over the last century or so, unions of all stripes have become more close-knit with the government. And so now the powers that they have are elevated, and what we're seeing in terms of, and are you talking mostly about teachers' unions, or am I going on a tangent about
No, teachers'
labor
unions, SE,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Gotcha.
all the government unions, but right down to the Teamsters.
Yeah. So when unions are empowered by the government and they're given these excess sway in these companies, the increases in pay that they advocate for and and things of that nature ultimately just get passed on to the consumer, and it can become a bit excessive. So whereas unions once fought to maintain a living wage for employees, now it's just pushing for, in some cases, not always, just more and more and more, and that just gets passed on to the consumer. And so I would like to, whenever it's within my power, to try to bring things back to how they were traditionally when it comes to how unions operate. Now I am a fan of unions, and I'm also a fan of traditional mutual aid societies. In fact, I'm a member of a very old mutual aid society called the Independent Order of Oddfellows. And so I am a fan of these institutions that help communities come together and with mutual insurance and acting as Samaritan groups to help gather funds and pay for certain public utilities. I'm sure you've seen Samaritan groups with their logos, like for example the Rotary Club on like a public park or some other public fixture, or some of these other organizations will come together, pitch in their money every month and pay for members' healthcare fees and that sort of thing. So I'm a fan of mutual aid, I'm a fan of unions, but I want to make sure these exist in their traditional fashion, and that these aren't empowered by the state, so to speak.
So you mentioned Oddfellows, so I guess you would include Masons, Elks, other fraternal organizations that do good in the community but are voluntary groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these mutual aid societies used to be the backbone of American culture for the most part. These were organizations that paid for most of these public fixtures. They used to before the creation of the welfare state, a lot of these organizations effectively did what the welfare state does now. They provided health care for their members. They provided them food when they're out of work. They provided them a place to unionize. They provided for their funeral fees. They took care of family members if they fell ill or if they died. And so it's a little bit idealistic to say we could bring these institutions back to how they used to be and replace the welfare state with them. But I believe that these are a very great tool for bringing power and independence away from the government and back to the communities. That's one of the themes of my campaign, is building strong communities where we focus on community-based solutions, charitable solutions, voluntary solutions before we focus on government-based solutions.
Well, I'm going to propose that it took 100 years for socialism to take control. Mm-hmm. I think the private groups and the private charities and the private institutions and the individuals would be so much more successful. They could turn it around in about 20 or 30 years, because the 100 years has been a failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell us, you've started the campaign. I've heard you give several speeches. Now I'm going to ask the hardest part is, tell us more about your campaign and your platform now that I've picked it apart.
So my campaign it's not just about trying to get into the state Senate and try to get these legislators to listen to their arguments and interact with each other and cooperate. It's not just about the main issues in California we face, like increasing costs of living, increasing rates of drug abuse and violent crime. It's also about a vision I have for California. I would like to see a California where individuals are connected in close-knit communities that are interdependent, where people care for each other and their communities in their free will. I want to fight for a California where markets are truly free, where small businesses flourish. And I want to fight for a California where we preserve our wilderness and our wild nature, and humanity has close contact with nature. And so free markets, wild nature, and strong communities are my main points, and that's the main vision I have for California. And so you better believe that any legislation that I push for, that I write, that I amend, and all my actions in the state Senate would be to aim for that purpose.
Talking about parks, what's your favorite park?
My favorite park? Well, in the state of California, one of my favorite childhood memories was going up north of Santa Cruz. I'm not sure which park it was in, but I saw the redwoods. And I just, back then I believed in Bigfoot. Yeah. And so I was out there hunting for Bigfoot and having a great time, just lost in nature.
Were you past San Francisco, or was it between Santa Cruz and San Jose?
It was right around Santa Cruz proper. I stopped there after going to the mystery spot, I believe it's called. Yeah. And so I've had some great experiences up in nature, and my family is originally I'm originally from Seattle. My parents are from here in Santa Barbara. I was born in Seattle. They moved me back here when I was 6 years old. I'm an honorary local, I like to say. But I've driven up the West Coast. I've seen the beauty of this area of the United States. And so I've always been awestruck, and I've always felt comfortable in these areas of the United States just surrounded by wild nature. And so that, to a degree, has influenced some of my views and it's what's made me a classical environmentalist, I like to say today. I believe in free market environmentalism, I believe in preservationism, and some of my biggest influences would be the American transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau. And so that's sort of an aspect of my campaign as well.
So given the choice of leaving Seattle and coming to Santa Barbara, you would only take Highway 5 if you had to get there in a day. Otherwise, you would come down Highway 1.
Yeah, well, I think there's no way to get up to Seattle in a day, but
I do it in 17 hours.
17 hours. Oh yeah, well it is 15. Yeah, if my family would usually take a pit stop.
Yeah.
But if you could theoretically, yes. Time-wise, if you're going to take the 5, but I do like the California's scenic highways. We do have a great system of scenic highways, and I'd love to go up to. Soon, I hope to drive up to San Francisco, mostly on the Highway 1.
Yeah. Nature keeps reminding us, particularly on Highway 1, that nature is in control.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's open now, but every winter, if we get a 3-inch storm, it won't be open. Nature will reclaim the highway.
Yeah, like clockwork, every winter it's going to be shut down. You can really see the movements of nature as Highway 1 closes due to another rock slide.
You didn't pick Hearst Castle as one of your favorite parks.
I could have. I've been to Hearst Castle. I've been nearby to watch the sea lions. Yeah, absolutely. I love Hearst Castle.
Yeah. The sea lions are something you will have to talk about in the legislature,
mm-hmm.
because they are becoming the natural predator,
mm-hmm.
and that really was man, isn't thinning them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're not taking them. And right here in Carpinteria and in other parts of the coast up near San Simeon,
mm-hmm.
They're getting out of control in population.
Mm-hmm.
People, I think, environmentalists, and you're saying you are, forget that man is a natural predator in our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't evil, that's a fact. And so that's become a problem. The other is this little beast that eats all this shellfish. Everybody thinks it's cute. Otter, sea otters,
mm-hmm.
and they're horrible. They should be all captured and put in a little aquarium in Monterey, I think.
Yeah.
They eat something like 150 pounds of shellfish every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, the shellfish have another purpose,
mm-hmm.
like oysters on the half shell.
There's always situations where certain species, for some reason or another, their natural predators have sort of faded out, and so, or they've become used to or sort of adapted to human hunting or human encroachment. And there are situations where there's just too many of a certain species. Their population is too large for the stability of the ecosystem, and so a lot of environmentalists get fixated on preserving every single animal and every single plant species, when sometimes in order to preserve the greater ecosystem, you've got to take some action to compensate for some negative changes that have led to situations.
Eastern Oregon, particularly, and in the eastern Washington, the wolf has become so prevalent that they're now paying people,
mm-hmm.
not to, they don't say, here, we'll give you a free hunting license or you have to pay $100. They're paying people to take them,
mm-hmm.
to go out and kill them, because they are the system has got out of whack by mm-hmm. preservation. You hike much around Santa Barbara and Ventura County?
Yeah, once in a while I try to get out and hike near Rattlesnake Canyon, places like that, yeah. But to speak to the wolf situation, I've heard some conflicting information on that issue up in Idaho and Montana, I believe you're talking about. But sometimes I would argue that when for some reason or another human action or something like that has caused a species to get out of its natural role and just take over. To be a true preservationist would be to take action and restore the order that previously existed, which may require getting rid of part of a population. That's just one thing I wanted to add to that situation.
In your hiking, have you ever run into a mountain lion?
I have actually never seen one, but my brother has. My nephew, who was 5 at the time, one came right up to his house and he was freaked out. And
where was that?
They live up right in between Santa Barbara and Goleta.
Yeah.
And so he's been asking me ever since. He's been fantasizing about getting his Nerf gun and shooting a coyote or shooting a mountain lion. And he asked me, Uncle Elijah, what would happen if I shot a coyote with my Nerf gun? And I was like, I think he's going to fight back. I don't think that would do too much. But yeah, so my nephew's seen one. I haven't yet.
Well, we lived out in Rancho Embarcadero, and a bobcat began to take we let our chickens run wild. Mm-hmm. We had geese, and all of a sudden they'd end up dead, mm-hmm. at night. And I even found where the bobcat had taken them, and one took it right off our porch, and I found it, and I got my gun, and I was going to kill it. My wife wanted to call the county trapper, mm-hmm. and he said, "Oh, tell him he can't do that." And I said, "Tell him, get out here and answer the problem, because I'll do it, and I'll put the beast up on the telephone pole for all the others to see." Let's go to Sacramento. Mm-hmm. They are dictating from Sacramento certain zoning, density, regulations. I go to that not because I'm in real estate, but because the cost of housing has become so high, it's a trickle down to mm-hmm. whether or not you can buy food for your cat. Mm-hmm. What's your position on regulation of zoning?
Yeah, so I believe from the perspective of a libertarian and a believer in free markets, I'd like to see the government out of planning cities and planning communities in terms of zoning restrictions and regulations and things of that nature. And one positive thing I've seen among some Democrat-leaning individuals, not necessarily in our legislature, but a lot of individuals are pushing for more free markets just because we need to build housing. The cost of living here is very high, and one of those issues is we just don't have sufficient housing. And going through a long process of finding the right area of a town to build housing, going through the regulations and the fees of the city, we're just not building it fast enough. We need to have, and so a lot of people are pushing for dense, walkable areas being formed more or less by just getting the government out of the situation and relieving some of those restrictions. And so I personally am an advocate for just getting the government out of that area so we can just build housing where we need it, when we need it. And yeah.
Well, that's always spoken to. We have a group in town, and they are on my show about every 6 months, called CAB, Cars Are Basic. And they believe that cars are basic to our transportation needs. The opponents say, if we do what you said, in-build, mm-hmm. and expect the people there to not have cars, but to go for their services within walking distance, mm-hmm. their entertainment within walking distance, where's a libertarian in that?
Well, so I believe that we shouldn't be mingling with a lot of the planning we've already had in place and already constructed. I mean, I've seen on State Street, since they've shut it down with the plans of building a walkable promenade, I've seen how a lot of businesses have just shut down. The activity on State Street's lower. The consequence on these businesses who have come there would be just losing business. I'm not very optimistic about it becoming a hub for activity here in Santa Barbara. And so I personally would believe that when we're talking about building or expanding communities for when it comes to the planning we haven't really already done, we should try to allow for free markets to build dense, walkable areas. We shouldn't really start just slicing up the roads and the ways communities are already planned out. And so that's sort of.
So are you more comfortable with East Goleta, or is it West for that way? West Goleta, where you have a Mercado shopping center and condos are and housing being built within a mile or two of it?
Yeah, I'm comfortable from a libertarian standpoint. I'm comfortable with what the free market is creating. That's my sort of take. Now, I have my own views on the types of areas of town I'd like to live in, the types of density I'd like to have around me, but that really dictates where I move to, the type of area that I'm going to go to. Now, I'm a fan of having wide open spaces and the ability to buy land, so in the future I might move out of those sorts of areas. But when it comes to planning, I believe things should be really left to the markets, because the markets and the demand for housing are these know best in terms of what we need. I think us using government regulation to sacrifice having a good amount of cheap housing for the sake of some aesthetic purpose is an issue, because we have people who are struggling, a lot of them, to pay for housing, and we need to just have more of it. And we have to free the markets to allow housing to just flourish. And so if we're going to keep controlling things for the sake of having a certain aesthetic of different areas, the issues aren't going to be solved. And so I think the government needs to take their hands off.
Well, I keep promising to let you go back to your base core speech and your website. And so tell us, you've started out, give us an idea of specifics in your philosophy.
Specifics in my philosophy. So, well, I've covered the libertarianism bit a moment ago. And so the other aspect of my philosophy would be sort of my more environmentalist leaning. Now, I know the term environmentalist brings up a lot of connotations. So I like to use the term classical environmentalist. So when I'm talking about environmentalism, I'm not talking about telling people to use their gas stoves less. I'm not talking about telling people what type of car to buy or that sort of thing. I'm talking about the tradition that America has had of preserving our wilderness, preserving our natural wonders, working on having stable ecosystems and having ample opportunity for individuals to experience nature, to live close to nature if they want. And overall, my sentiment is that humans in general should live in harmony with nature. We should be interacting with nature in the natural world in just a more broad, holistic sense. And so I want to encourage and allow for individuals to live more traditional, sustainable, natural lifestyles. I want to preserve the wild nature we do have, and I want to put forth free market environmentalism. Now what that means is it's essentially allowing free markets to put forth innovations that help the environment. So I'm a fan of nuclear energy, I'm a fan of geothermal energy, all these different alternative energy sources that can be viable in some areas of the US or many areas of the US, but are currently very restricted by the government. And so if we want to move in this all-electric sense that a lot of people talk about, we're going to have to allow the free market to operate and create some cheap, sustainable, ecologically sound energy. And so free market environmentalism also has to do with protecting the individual's right to their property and their body when it comes to pollution and issues like that, using the fundamentals of the free market to justify necessary regulations when it comes to air pollution, water pollution, things like that.
Before I ask the next question, define the district you're running for.
Yes.
It
so
was just Santa Barbara County briefly.
Yeah, so we've been talking about Santa Barbara County, but my district covers not only Santa Barbara County, covers all of it. It also covers about half of Ventura County. It stretches into parts of Oxnard, and then it covers about the lower quarter of San Luis Obispo County. And so it's a very broad area. It has about so there's 40 state senate districts in California, and the population is working its way up to 40 million. So it covers almost 40 million people. Now I like to talk about that because the state of California has not expanded its legislature, or at least uncapped its legislature size, since the state was founded. We have 40 state senators, and that was designed for a state of about 200,000 people at most. Now we're coming up on 40 million. We still have 40 state senators and 80 state assembly people. And so in the state of California, we definitely need to work on, I would personally advocate for trying to uncap our legislature. That would be one thing. I'm currently drafting up different legislative ideas I've had for things I'd like to have in place. And one of those would be having the ability to expand our legislature and maybe even also lower some of the pay and benefits for legislatures. And they're not going to be legislators. Now, they're not going to be happy about that. But we are paying quite a bit for them. And so I believe we can cut the costs slightly, and with that, be able to manage to add more representation to the state. Because it's virtually impossible for one individual to represent 1 million. The nuance, the reason we have a representative government is so that we can have individuals representing the nuanced, localized issues of different areas, and that's impossible when we're talking about one individual representing 1 million.
Well, the fact is, and you I'm sure know this, that you would represent in the Senate more people than our congressmen
Yes.
do.
Yes, it's astounding. We have I believe 42 or 43 congressional districts in the state of California.
52 or 50.
Oh yes. Oh, I see. Yes.
And 40.
And 40 state Senate seats.
There's a group that years ago was working on, but they went crazy. They wanted to go back to a representative representing 29,000 people because that was the traditional number, and that, of course, was crazy and unruly. But there are people that believe, just as you have, but no one has said it recently, that it might be nice to make the Senate 100 people.
Yeah.
And so that's still an unwieldy number of 400,000 people a Senate seat, but at least
there's more representation.
Yeah, I've been around when it was that, and we got around and talked to people.
Yeah, I mean, what this system has left us with is our legislators are not representing the nuanced concerns of localities. What they're really doing is they're pulling party lines.
Yeah.
And there's just a total lack of cooperation in our state Senate. From just watching the live streams, you can see that the Republicans or even more just moderate-minded individuals in the Senate are arguing constantly, just trying to put forth their opinions. But the Democrats, who have the majority, are just focused on pushing forward their party line, voting how they're supposed to vote, and it's just mechanical. There's no real pushback.
Make sure they have support.
Yeah, really what's going on in our legislature is that the Democratic Party is putting through legislation. Our ongoings in our legislature are just mechanics that don't really matter at the end of the day, because once the Democrats are for something, it's just going to go through quick.
Well, your district may include the only operating nuclear power plant in the state.
Yes.
And it's even the left has decided, being it produces 11% of the energy for the state, we can't close this down.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be closed down last year. And then they agreed to 25. And now even Newsom and everybody is 2035.
Yeah.
And the question is, why not more? And I have a brilliant son who says, there's probably 5,000 nuclear reactors around this country, like not quite as big as that power plant, but 5,000? He said, well, the whole Navy and the retired Navy and every military base, and he just started reeling where there's nuclear power everywhere.
Yeah.
And nobody's it's been how long since 3 Mile Island and 3 people got sick, nobody died.
Yeah.
And so you've hit on a very safe and some that not many politicians are talking about. What about, and this would be your job in the state, how do you control and force electrical cars?
Yeah, I don't believe we should be enforcing electric cars. I believe, again, as a libertarian, it's sort of just let the market deal with it. If people want to purchase electrical cars, if it becomes cost effective, if technology moves forward in a way where it's just more efficient to go with electric, then that's how things will go. But I don't believe that the state pushing these artificial points in time where we've got to be all electric by 2030 and so on and so forth. That's just it's just infringing on the free market, and it's pushing something at a speed where it's not going to be viable.
Am I evil when I pull up next to somebody in a Tesla and yell at them, "You welfare recipient"? Because welfare is the transfer of money from one person to another, and there isn't a Tesla on the road that doesn't have $20,000 in government subsidies somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I take it as a libertarian, that's not the free market. You would
No,
go.
it's not.
So electric cars are dinosaurs. They'll be gone in 20 years. Most of them burned up on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
So in the legislature, you would continue to say, "Where is freedom?"
Yeah, that'd be my main thing. Is I would constantly. So of course, if I make it into office, that's just the beginning of the fight. There is a Democrat supermajority in both houses of our legislature. There's not much I can do about anything altogether. But what I can do is I can constantly be in the ear of the Democrats and just push these ideas until hopefully they listen, or the public listens and they vote for people who share the ideas that I'm putting forward. And so that would be asking where's freedom is going to be one of the main things I would do if elected.
So what's your next step?
My next step in terms of, well, if I don't get this office, I'll run for another and another and another. And I will continue to, on social media or in any public hearing or anything I can get to, I'll try to advance and put forth the ideas of liberty, the ideas of classical environmentalism everywhere I go. Because again, this is my passion, this is my sport, this is on my tongue all the time. And so that's just sort of going forward, that's constantly what I'm going to be trying to do, is trying to get into office, or at the very least just express these views and get them out there.
Well, there are some services that the belief of the last at least 50 years has been that's a government job. How do you feel about privatization of government programs and activities, police, fire, the military? The military till the First World War was very small, and it was local communities, National Guard.
Yeah.
So how do should we be moving toward privatization and away from government? Tell how libertarian fits into that.
Yeah, so from the libertarian perspective, it's very complicated. It's a case-by-case basis thing when we're talking about abolishing certain government entities or government services and replacing them with market-based solutions or community-based solutions. But the goal in mind is to do that, to try to minimize the government and maximize what the free market is providing and what communities are voluntarily providing for each other. And so fostering free markets and free market solutions and fostering strong communities is the main goal for the libertarian. And so when it comes to, for example, the police, privatizing the police that's just a very, very complex process. And I think when it comes to policing in the state of California, I think what we need to focus on at the moment is less the ideals of privatizing everything from the libertarian standpoint. And I think at this point we should focus on making sure the police have sufficient funding and making sure that we continue to enforce our laws in regards to violent crime. Because in the state of California, what we've been seeing is the slow decriminalization of minor violent crimes. As you may know, we're talking about theft, for example. And now in the state of California, it's very hard to get someone to face any sort of justice whatsoever if they take property from a store that's under the value of $999, and that incentivizes more criminal activity, more gang activity. It incentivizes people to just walk into stores in hordes and just grab under $999 worth of stuff and just bolt.
So you're saying as a legislator you would want to roll that back to the 300 limit before it's a felony and prosecute people who take more than...
Yeah, I believe that we need to be making sure that violent crime or major or minor has some sort of punishment in order to deter it. Because at this point, we're not deterring it, we're incentivizing it. And as a libertarian, I believe that the government's job, first and foremost, is to make sure individuals are not violating each other's bodies or property, and theft falls under that. And so that's one of the main issues for me as a libertarian.
Well, the weight of taxation and bureaucracy is bringing a crisis to certain areas: police, fire, education, parks. As that crisis, because we're down most areas, we only have 60% of the jobs for police filled, 80% of fire filled, even the park system 80%. Are the libertarians ready to enter into the discussion of how these entities are privatized, or how we answer those problems?
So when it comes to the overall bureaucracy in these organizations, from the libertarian standpoint, all these issues, when we're talking, again, it's a case-by-case basis type issue. Each individual agency has different natures and conditions that we need to research on and work on, cutting the fat off these organizations, that sort of thing, when it comes to the bureaucracy. But from the libertarian standpoint, again, I personally wouldn't focus much on privatizing a whole lot of basic government services when it comes to police, military, fire. There are various more complicated ways we could work towards that goal, but my main ideal isn't just starting to try to let's privatize these.
No, I was asking, as they collapse,
I see.
Where do the libertarians enter into the discussion of how they're replaced?
Oh, how they're replaced, I see. Well, when it comes to police, for example, as these organizations start to fade, if they're going to just start to collapsing on their own under the weight of their own bureaucracy, we're going to need to make sure there are private entities out there that are operating, that are willing to, say, when it comes to police, enforce the laws of the United States and the state of California. We're going to need to find organizations that are willing to do that. We're more than likely going to have to give them funding, subsidize them, and in a sense, they'll sort of be appendages of our police force that's already in existence. And so the same would go for our fire department and other services.
You're in Sacramento, and many of the rules written in Sacramento are dictated to local governments and nonprofits. Would you be there advocating repeal?
For which type of rules in particular? Just
pick a set.
Regulations and restrictions,
Yeah.
Things that impede. If it impedes on the free market and individual self-ownership and the rights to private property, I will be speaking to as many as I can to try to just get those repealed or get that legislation stopped.
You got 5 minutes left. I've bounced you all over the place.
5 minutes? Wow, that went by fast.
I've never had a guest who didn't walk out of here after 58 minutes and say, we could have done another hour or 2 hours, and we will. What do you want people to take from this in the last 5 minutes and say, Jim, shut up?
Well, if anyone's interested in hearing more about my campaign, you can definitely check out my website. Now, my website has quite a long link because it's a Google site. Now, I haven't been able to pay for my own private website yet because campaign finance and all that. I'm finalizing my campaign bank account tomorrow. But you can check out.
People can give to you.
Yeah, then people can give to me. But for the time being, you can find my website linked on my Twitter, which is Elijah for California, spelled F-O-R. So Elijah, capital E, capital F-O-R, then C-A. And so you can find my link there. And so if you want to hear more about my campaign, hear more about my platform in a fashion that's more direct than me sitting here pontificating and rambling.
And Worthen interfering. Go ahead.
If you want to hear in my own words, my platform given in a straight, short and sweet fashion, you can check out my website pinned on my Twitter account. And so for the time being, again, I'm not able to accept donations, but if you want to stay updated and you want to donate to my campaign, you will find that information posted on my Twitter for sure.
And being an old line politician, people will say, I like that guy. I'd like to introduce him to my
Oh, yes.
Lions Club. I'd like to introduce, Lions still around. I'd like to take him to Elks. I'd like to, how do they reach you to interface with you and help you physically
So you can contact me at elijahmackforcalifornia@gmail.com. Everything's spelled out. Again, 4 is FOR, not the number 4. So elijahmackforcalifornia@gmail.com.
Do you want to get out a phone number, or do you want them to reach you there and then you'll respond?
Yeah, I check my email multiple times a day, or at least I try to. And so I don't have a campaign-specific phone number yet. So I don't want to give out my personal, but I will reach anyone who contacts me through the email quite quickly.
Once you've got $10,000 or $20,000 in your account from the people who are going to donate to you, you'll be able to provide maybe even an office where they can come and grab you by the throat. I'm from the teachers union. Do you like doing that? Are you a people person?
I am a people person. I'm a bit of an introvert, but I'm passionate about my beliefs, and talking about them energizes me, and that can get me out there to talk to people. And I have a good deal. I have a good amount of time I can chit chat and talk about my views before I get to.
Don't be afraid of being an introvert. I tell people, I'm a scared little boy inside. That little kid from 6 or 7 years old is still in there. Are they going to like me? Should I say this? Should I once got up in front of a church group and said, unaccustomed as I am to speaking, because there was about 150 people there, and they all laughed. And I said, I don't speak to crowds. I speak over the air. I speak one-on-one. I'll speak to 10 or 20 people, but inside, I'm an introvert. And you're describing the same thing. Have to pull it out of you. You've been great. You're right. There's never enough time. I hope I didn't take too much, and I hope you'll come back.
Oh yeah, I'd love to.
Elijah, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on the program.
We'll be sitting here.